Boom! Blessings and much love, and a very pleasant night, everyone, at Prophetic Heartbeat. This is Prophecy Tutorial with Coach Zane Pear. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm actually one of the coaches here at Prophetic Heartbeat. And tonight is yet another night of Prophecy Tutorial. All right, for those of you who are actually listening to me on our YouTube channel as well as on Ancient Biblical Pneumatology Facebook page, Prophetic Heartbeat is actually a community on Facebook that is actually one of the best prophetic communities on Facebook, hosted by Polyby Ministries and the School of Sonship Lifestyle. All right, we are committed to training and equipping the body of Christ through the use and application of God's Word. We study and educate not on how to hear God's voice, but on how you have been always hearing God's voice. What you simply need to do is identify it. All right, we have identified it through God's name, Jesus Christ, who we identify as our name in Christ, in us, our spiritual name, and how the Spirit of God functions through us. If you have not visited Prophetic Heartbeat, this is a cordial invitation to visit our Facebook group, Prophetic Heartbeat, or even the Sonship Lifestyle Inner Circle group, where you can actually even be mentored to actually function in the prophetic. So today we are actually speaking about how to not fall outside of your prophetic role. All right, I actually attempted to go live just a while ago, and actually had some technical difficulties, but we are here. And when I actually attempted to go live just a while ago, the introduction was no, that wasn't an introduction. The title was What a Prophet Does and Does Not. All right, huge shout out to Eric Markham joining us on our YouTube channel, and to everyone joining us in the Facebook group. If you are commenting, I'm not sure that I'm actually seeing your comments. Just making sure that I don't miss anybody. And for those of you joining us in Prophetic Heartbeat, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section. Let me know that you're there, so that I know that I'm not speaking, just carrying on a discourse by myself. So, how to not fall outside of your prophetic role. Now, in this segment in particular, one of the things in particular I'd like to bring to the attention of everyone who is actually listening to this and everybody in the prophetic community, there's something in particular that most persons within the prophetic realm, once you learn into prophesy, you'll struggle with, right? And for some persons, you may be told, that you may be not speaking in love, or you may be being a bit judgmental or applying condemnation to your prophecy. Now, even though this may be true, there is also context to this in scriptures. All right, and I think to actually understand the context of it in scriptures will give you a better idea. For those of you who are already functioning in the prophetic, it'll give you a better idea as to what you're actually experiencing and how to manage it. All right, now the first thing that you ought to know is that a prophet in the scriptures the template is actually taken from the Old Testament, beginning with Abraham. You might be surprised to know. He is actually seen as or referred to as a prophet in the scriptures. But I would even go as far as saying he is the first identified prophet in the scriptures. But we can also say that priests in the scriptures are prophets. That's actually one of their prophetic roles. Sorry, one of their priestly roles is to function as a prophet. And why is that? That's so because the priests, all priests in the scriptures, are actually a representation of the Adam in the Garden of Eden. All right, because the priests were actually placed in the tabernacle or the temple, and the tabernacle and the temple are physical structures that represents the Garden of Eden. So usually, even though the Bible refers to Abraham as a prophet, he's the first mentioned prophet where you get definition. You know, that he's the first mentioned prophet where the definition is found that when the prophet prays, you'd receive life, because that is what the man in the garden was, life. You can also go as far as saying that the first priest in the scriptures that go way back to Genesis chapter 4, they are also prophets, right? Because you cannot, the prophecy is really just a function or one of the isolated functions of the man in the garden. Now, for most of us in particular, if you've actually been functioning in prophecy, you may have been, so in some cases, some persons are told you're prophesying, but you're actually speaking things that that may fall under the category of condemnation. In some cases, there may be things that come to your mind whilst you're prophesying that doesn't seem as though it's all about approval. In some cases, you may feel the inclination when functioning in the prophetic energy. You may feel the inclination to actually tell someone, stop doing this or don't do this. And then there are other times where you may see something that the person might be having a personal struggle with. And many times you're prophesying and information that is actually coming to your mind while it's in the prophetic energy is actually specifically telling them about details going on in their life now. Now, for some of us in particular, we might say, well, you know, that is actually not a God thought. But if you understand yourself holistically, you'll understand that it is something that is actually a God thought, but you just may not have actually put it into the correct perspective. All right. Now, what perspective is that? The thing is, within our modern Christian community, we have the tendency to treat prophecy a bit differently and understand it differently from what the authors of these scriptural texts understand. Right? As I just mentioned, a prophet is usually a representation of or a function of the man in the garden, who is actually known as the spokesman of God, the spokesman of Elohim. And as a spokesman of Elohim, he can give life. Prophecy is also acknowledged as a function of the priests in the scriptures. And as a matter of fact, we can even go so far as to understand that what our modern Christian culture has actually framed the fivefold ministry is really not the fivefold ministry, even though with good intentions they've framed it like that. Jesus is actually a priest, and what Jesus is actually, what Paul is identifying there, that Christ has actually technically broken himself up into pieces, into parts for the growth of the members of the body of Christ, is the different functions of a priest. What I'm saying is that what we refer to as a fivefold ministry are actually the 5 functions of a priest. The priest, all those 5 things are actually what composes or consists of a priest. Now, in this context, the five components that you see mentioned in the book of Ephesians, even though the Apostle Paul technically identifies it as part of the priesthood, it is not the only function of a priest. Right? A priest in particular, as I just mentioned, is a physical representation in a physical model of the Garden of Eden, representing the man in the garden. Right? And as the man in the garden, he is actually taking on the identity and the name of Yahweh Elohim as his own, and he's walking that out as a vocation. Right? Now, this in particular, these are things that are unknown in our Westernized Christian culture, but it is the normal paradigm of the scriptures. And if you want to better understand your prophecy and to become a little more fine-tuned, then I strongly encourage you to reconsider the Westernized perspective that you may have been taught, because it is the Westernized perspective that has actually been a hindrance and created a barrier that you are not passing. Now, as I mentioned there just now, you may have these experiences where you're giving details and all the 4 things that I mentioned, and what you may not know is that those 4 things that I mentioned there are actually the expressions of 4 gifts of the Spirit. Now, to understand these 4 gifts of the Spirit, you really need to pause and give attention or give consideration to their functions, so that if you are functioning in the prophetic and if you want to specify and function just in prophecy, then it is very important to you to understand what the other gifts are. So when these gifts begin to function in you, you do not step into self-condemnation, or you do not look at yourself as though something is wrong, but really understand that these are the functions of those gifts, and you may be approaching them through the lens of Westernized Christian doctrine, which is usually doctrines based in some sort of condemnation, or doctrines that encourage persons to pursue their validation, to pursue their approval before God, and not bring it into the context that it should be, which is through the perspective of approval and justification of all believers. So, in speaking about that, let's now take a look at what these 4 gifts that we're speaking about are. The first gift that we spoke about is the gift of prophecy. That we want to speak about here today is the gift of prophecy. Right? And the gift of prophecy is basically a prophet in particular in scriptures. If I don't know if this has actually been framed for you like this, but a prophet in the scriptures was actually understood to be the representative of God's covenant. If you look through the scriptures, you realize that when Israel and the priesthood of Israel stepped into corruption and fell out, God would always raise a prophet. And the prophet would be the one that's literally functioning as the guardian of the covenant. He is the one that would go to the nation, go to the king, go to the people, and call them back to the covenant. The prophet in particular was understood to be the spokesman of Elohim, and the covenant was understood to be the voice of Elohim. So the covenant, the prophet was actually seen as the voice of God, meaning the covenant of God. The covenant was actually referred to as the voice of God. Right? So basically, if you're functioning in prophecy, you are supposed to be the voice of your covenant. Now, in the old covenant, which is the Mosaic laws, which is actually what we call the Mosaic law code, the prophets of the Mosaic law code represented the covenant of the law. And in the covenant of the law, there were blessings and curses. So a prophet, being the voice of God, which is the covenant in the form of a man speaking to them, the prophet in particular would actually warn them of the coming destruction when Israel would turn away from the covenant. Now, many of us have actually seen this in scriptures and assume that God is punishing Israel. But what we have, this is a perspective that is taught in the Westernized Christian culture that is outside of the paradigm of the Bible. It would make sense because as an English reader in the Westernized Christian world, with the logic that you are using in reading the Bible, it'll make sense to you because of the system of logic that you are reading the text through. But if you actually approach the text through the lens of the garden, or through the lens of the ancient Hebrews, through their system of logic, you would realize that God never punished Israel. When the prophets in particular prophesied Israel's destruction, it was never initiated by God. Because Israel in particular lived in the paradigm that God was, or God is all and in all, they would literally recount the story by saying that God did it because everything is in God. But the covenant in itself never really validated the fact that God did Israel anything. What Israel would do is reap the list of curses, because once the prophet spoke long enough, and Israel actually got to the point of no longer having a conscience but becoming indifferent to what the covenant that they entered into said, what God will do is actually remove his presence from Israel, and they will reap the curses outside of his presence. This is why you notice when Israel would actually get into tragedy, they have been overtaken by ruling nations and they've been left desolate. They always speak about the presence of God, and if the presence of God, where is the presence of God? Because the whole idea of actually facing God's quote-unquote wrath, even though it's communicated by the people like that, the covenant actually understands it. The covenant communicated their experience as God removing his presence from them. Right? And that is a separate topic that we can actually unpack at a separate occasion. So technically, the prophet is the covenant. The prophet is the spokesman of God. The prophet is the voice of God. And the covenant is called the voice of God. So the prophet is actually a representation of the covenant. If you are a prophet in the new covenant does not contain curses in any form or fashion. There is no list of curses. There is no list of curses in the covenant. The new covenant is the covenant of blessing. Therefore, a prophet in the new covenant, if you are functioning specifically in the perspective of prophecy, then the only thing that you will do is bless, which is why the Apostle Paul actually makes reference to the fact that the purpose of the prophet is to build up, to exhort, and to encourage. Now, whilst you might be functioning in prophecy, as I mentioned, you may be also experiencing discernment of spirit. And what is discernment of spirit? Now, even though this has been mystified in our Westernized Christian culture, discernment of spirit actually connects two concepts that in our English language we identify as two separate things. What we assume when it says discernment of spirit, it means you assume that it's referring to discernment of an evil spirit. And even though this has about 25% truth to it, it is not the full concept. See, whereas we are taught in our culture that thoughts are just things and evil spirits are entities that come from some demonic realm to actually enter persons, the ancient Hebrews did not see it like that. The ancient Hebrews approached the mind and the realm of the mind. They actually parallel the realm of the mind with the spiritual realm. And every thought that you have or that you may have that is not according to the thoughts of Yahweh, but a thought that falls under the category of the knowledge of good and evil, they will refer to that as an evil thought. Any thought that is not functional is dysfunctional, which means it's actually according to the knowledge of good and evil. They would refer to that as an evil spirit. Now, in their culture, the spirit, your mind, because you are a spirit being, the things that you choose, you make a decision to treat as truth, you actually multiply the nature of that thought as another spiritual entity, which is what the blessing of Genesis chapter 1 is speaking about. You'll be fruitful in your thoughts and your decisions, and the decisions that you make multiply, fills the earth with your spirit, and subdues it according to the thoughts that you're supposed to have. Now, in the garden, that was supposed to be God's thoughts. Outside of the garden, that's a thought that is not God's thoughts. It's a thought that is actually using an external reference point or external priority. Man used a tree when he fell outside of the garden. And so when it says spirit, it's actually referring to your mindset and the multiplication of your spirit by the things that you believe. So when it says discernment of spirit, another way to say discernment of spirit is identification of your mindset. And as a result of the thoughts that you may have that is not of the covenant, but of the knowledge of good and evil, you may have actually given birth to even what people would actually refer to as evil spirits. Right? That's your thought system, your thought realm that is multiplying after its own kind. Now, when you actually function in prophecy, you could discern people's thoughts, their mindset. You can literally discern the things that they have actually given birth to in their lives. Now, notice that this actually falls under the category of discernment of spirit. You see this in Jesus's function whilst he was here as an individual, where he constantly discerns the thoughts of the Pharisees. You read it and you think discernment of spirit, and you think evil spirit. What that really is referring to is discernment of mindset and discernment of thoughts. And if you're living from that thought as a reference point, as your truth, then you're going to be multiplying those thoughts after your own kind. The third thing that you're actually experiencing whilst you're functioning in the spiritual energy is word of wisdom. This is a common one. And in word of wisdom is actually the ability, according to the scripture, is the ability to discern or to differentiate between what is functional from what is dysfunctional. Which means where there are thoughts that come up in your mind that actually see something that is possibly dangerous to that individual, it becomes evident to you, and then naturally there is the normal response to actually tell the person, if you do this, this could lead to death. Now, you see the Apostle Paul doing this in the New Testament, Romans chapter 8, where he says, if you're so into the spirit, you reap life and peace. If you're so into the flesh, you reap ruin and destruction in the flesh. Many of us have been actually taught that when God is speaking to you, God speaks to you only in good, kind thoughts and encouraging thoughts. Now, if you're functioning in the realm of a prophet and you're representing the covenant, that will be true. But the rest of these things that you're actually identifying here as gifts of the Spirit, prophecy is just one aspect of it. What you are actually experiencing is the rest of the functions of your priesthood. The rest of the functions of your priesthood or of your sonship. Now, the word of wisdom would actually be thoughts that actually come to your mind where you identify something that is detrimental, that is dysfunctional, and you actually have a thought that says, tell this person if they continue to do this, they're going to die. Or you may actually, while in the prophetic energy, see that the person is going to do this and is actually going to lead to their demise. What you're experiencing there is the word of wisdom. Right? These things are not evil. They're actually is actually the manifestations of the Spirit. In some cases, you may even be seeing dreams. And whilst you're having dreams, some dreams you see, according to the garden, once you're functioning from your spirit, there is no night in the realm of your spirit. And so you function in the spirit and you tend to see dreams that are actually in the daytime. We have actually assessed this over time and actually saw patterns. And we see that a lot of time when you're functioning in the spirit, you see dreams in the day. And you see, and you begin to see everything in your dreams as peaceful, and whatever is being communicated to you is being communicated to you in a realm where you are secure, there's peace, and there's nothing that is of harm to you. There are other times, whilst even you're functioning in the perspective of a prophet, you give yourself to this life, and you have dreams that seem to be at night. And these dreams at night very, very commonly, you have experiences where those things in the dream, you see things in the dreams, in your dreams, that at night, that actually inspires fear. It inspires a sense of anxiety. And what you're actually looking at is your function of wisdom working throughout your dreams also, where you may be in a situation and being given and experiencing something, and you're having these negative dreams, and it's not an attack, it's actually revealing that the situation that you may be experiencing is as a result of you not actually you may have unknowingly moved your trust from the spirit in you, and you're using something external of you to be your catalyst, to be you're using something external of you to cause you to react, or using something external of you to determine your behavior, to determine your decisions. And so you may see in those, if you're actually giving yourself to that for some time, you begin to see these dreams where everything is in the nighttime, and there's a sense of anxiety and fear. And even though fear is not of God, what you are actually seeing is actually the gift of wisdom working. And what the wisdom here is basically telling you is basically showing you that if you continue using this external reference point as your as your as the motivator for your behavior and for your actions, what you're doing is not functioning in life. You're not functioning in the day. You're functioning outside of the spirit. And what you're actually seeing is what the Garden of Eden demonstrates. In the garden, in the Garden of Eden, it actually shows that when you function from your spirit, you cultivate and keep the creation. But if you actually use an external reference point as your motivator to fill yourself with thought, as the motivator for your actions, your behavior, you're reacting to people's behaviors and so on, what you've just done is switch the function from cultivating and keeping the creation, and you're using creation to cultivate and to keep your mind, or to cultivate and keep your spirit. And so what you're seeing in your dreams, you may call it Satan and demonic, which is not wrong. But even though it is that, it's actually a revelation of the gift of wisdom. What you're seeing is a differentiation in your dreams. What you're seeing is a differentiation in dreams of what is dysfunctional. All right. And the last thing that you experience as a prophet, whilst functioning as a prophet, is the word of knowledge. And the word of knowledge basically is where you actually come into the understanding or the awareness of details of the person's life that they did not tell you, but you actually learn, you actually become aware of it whilst you're actually functioning there. Now, these four things are usually happening once you're actually functioning in the spirit. Many times, many people are not aware of these four functions. And so what you may tend to do is to think, well, that's an ungodly thought. And even though it is true that it's an ungodly thought, it's actually not from Satan, because as a being of God, you are designed to give the creation thoughts. And if you're functioning from the spirit, Satan cannot give you thought. What you are seeing actually will be the manifestation of these gifts, and even seeing what decisions this person could make that can actually result in their demise or the destruction later on of course, later on along their journey. Kind of on their way. Nice. So, in explaining all of that, what and how do you actually stay within the role of prophecy? Now, if you are experiencing the word of knowledge, then that is actually a manifestation that can actually tell people that the person that you are representing is God, and God knows everything about them. Remember, the prophet is the person that takes on God's identity and stands there as the presence of God. So it is not, once you're standing there as the presence of God, what the person is actually beginning to experience is that God knows about their life and details of their life that they may not have told anyone. Where the word of wisdom is functioning, if you're actually functioning in the context of prophecy, the word of wisdom is actually for your understanding. And if you want to stay if you want to stay in the realm or in the lines of prophecy, what you see in the word of wisdom is not necessarily for you to speak. If you want to stay within the function of prophecy, then what you want to do is to actually speak the covenant, be the voice of the covenant to what the person is experiencing. Be the voice of the covenant for what the person is experiencing. So if you see, for example, the Spirit actually reveals to you, whilst in the prophetic energy, you see a decision that is being made that can lead to destruction. What you can do, if you want to stay within the prophetic, what you can do is actually prophesy the answer to them. Instead of highlighting that this decision that you're making is going to lead to death, you can actually speak the covenant to them and highlight what decision that they should make and not highlight the decision that they are making. Right? Usually the word of wisdom will function once you are functioning as a priest. If you're functioning as a priest of God, then the word of wisdom is a function that you will demonstrate, where in your priesthood, you can identify that this decision that you're making here, it's actually going to lead to destruction. If you want to change this, make this decision. That's actually because the word of wisdom or wisdom is actually the application of the knowledge of God's name to the situation, which means that you are applying the principle of self-existence or self-determination to the circumstance to arrive at the God perspective of what to do and what not to do. If you're functioning as a prophet, that is not something that you want to engage. Right? That's actually where you are functioning as a priest. I'm reiterating this because the priests in particular are the ones that people come bring their issues to, and the priest discerns what is the God perspective of the situation and what is the knowledge of good and evil that you're functioning by to bring you into guidance as to what decision to make. Discernment of spirit as a prophet, definitely that's not something either that you want to actually begin to express. If you're functioning in prophecy, you must stay within the realms of the covenant, because the covenant is the voice of Elohim here. Right? The priestly job with regards to word of wisdom is where we take the wisdom of the covenant. Christ has been made wisdom unto you. You take the wisdom of God's name and you apply it to situations so that you can understand what decision to make and what decision not to make. If you're functioning as a prophet, that is not something, or if you want to stay within the function of a prophet in the new covenant, you want to actually veer away from that and actually stay within being the voice of blessings. Discernment of spirit, as I was saying, you may discern the person's thoughts, their struggles. And that also is another area that is actually functioning from the priesthood, right? Which is not necessarily something that you want to actually enlighten the person on. Discernment of spirit, if you actually look at how Jesus demonstrated the discernment of spirit, the discernment of spirit was demonstrated where Jesus knew the thoughts of the Pharisees and of the people. You'll notice that at no time did Jesus actually communicate to them that I am seeing in the spirit that you are thinking this, and you are thinking these evil thoughts. There's no point in time in the scriptures where Jesus does that. The discernment of spirit, therefore, is given to you to actually make decisions in intelligence with regards to who you are actually speaking to. And if you are prophesying, instead of actually highlighting what his struggles are, you want to actually use the blessing. And if they're struggling with A, then use the blessing to actually give them the answer as to how to not struggle with that anymore. So some person may be struggling with depression, and instead of actually saying, I'm seeing that you're suffering from oppression, There's nothing wrong in saying that no, God sees how you feel, something along the lines of God sees how you feel. Basically, what I'm saying is you don't, as a prophet, you are not there to actually bring any form of condemnation. So whatever you're communicating is a communication of the blessing of God on the person that actually um, that actually confirms the opposite of what they're experiencing. You are the voice of God, and the voice of God is your covenant. All right? The blessings of God are your covenant. So when you begin to function in the spirit, you will know that all of the thoughts that agree with the covenant will be the thoughts of the Spirit of God in you, which is life giving, encouraging, and building up. All right. So I trust that this session in particular has been insightful and given you some information, so that giving you the information necessary for you to understand what you may be experiencing, which gifts in particular that you are experiencing, and if you are functioning as a prophet, then discernment of spirit is not something that you want to communicate. It's actually to give you insight so that you can actually speak over the person and give life to them. Word of wisdom, you also see this in the New Testament. For example, when Peter begins to speak and tells Jesus that no harm will come to him, and Jesus says, "Get thee behind me, Satan." When you read that, what you're thinking is that Peter was rebuked. What you're seeing there is Jesus actually revealing the word of wisdom. What he's actually identifying is that his perspective at that time is dysfunctional. And anything that is dysfunctional is actually called Satan in the scriptures. Anything that is functioning contrary to what God intended it to function as is called Satan in the scriptures. So what you see Jesus doing there by actually saying, "Get thee behind me, Satan," is not a rebuke to Peter. And Peter, as a disciple, did not take it as rebuke. He would not have taken it as being reprimanded. That is actually wisdom at work. Wisdom is the identification of what is functional and what is dysfunctional. So when Peter would have heard that, Peter's response as a disciple would be to stop, identify that what he's saying is not from the covenant, not what Yahweh has said, and then he then begin to reorientate his perspective to what Yahweh has actually said. All right. And word of knowledge, of course, that actually gives a confirmation in your prophecy that God knows the person and the details of their lives. Remember, prophecy is, remember, if you remember, as a rule of thumb, that prophecy is two things. Number one, you represent the covenant, and therefore the covenant is called the voice of God in the Bible, and therefore you speak the covenant of blessing in the new covenant. There is no condemnation, there's no curses, there's blessing. Outside of that, like, sorry, that's one. And the second thing is that, so one is that you represent the covenant, and two, your purpose as a prophet is to build up, to exhort, and to encourage. Therefore, you never go to the opposite of what those three descriptions are. All right. So I trust that this session has been helpful. If you have any questions, please free to leave them in the comment section. And for those of you who actually sit down and listen throughout this segment, we are now at 38 minutes. This is actually going to be a 40-minute segment. So if you listen to this, please feel free to leave in the comment section your main takeaways from this particular tutorial. And I look forward to reading what your takeaways are, as well as what your questions may be. If you ask questions, I'll actually, as soon as I get the opportunity, I will go live in the group to give insight into what I may have been referring to. So this is Prophecy Tutorial by Coach Zane Pierre. Huge shout out to Polyview Ministries. Huge shout out to Prophetic Tutorial. Sorry, the Prophetic Heartbeat. I would say, mixing up my words that way. To Prophetic Heartbeat. See you next week, Tuesday, same time, for another segment of Prophecy Tutorial. Boom.